Hello, Peter here, and today I'm going to show how to create a Photoshop 3D scene. So for the scene, we're just going to make a simple spherical planet and put it into space. And afterwards, we will also be delving into Photoshop animation as we create a simple animation with our 3D and smart objects. So to start, I'm going to go File, New. And in Photoshop, when you're using 3D and video, we don't want to bog down the system too much, so I always suggest using web resolutions, unless of course you are reliant on how powerful your computer is. And for this one, I'm going to use a standard 1024 by 768, or actually let's bump it up to 1280. Okay. Now, in my scene, I want to be able to create an instant 3D sphere using a ready-made texture. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create the texture for the planet first. I'm going to go and make a new layer. And then I'm going to just pick two colors that I want my planet to sort of be. So I'm going to pick a sort of yellowish, and then in my background a little bit of a darker tone. With these two colors picked in my foreground and background, I'm going to just go to Filter, and Render, and Clouds. This will use the two colors to render out some clouds for me. Now, I want a little bit more contrast with the clouds, so I'm just going to quickly give it a levels. You can go Control L or Command L on a PC. And I'm just going to raise the darks and lights just to give it a little bit more variation. There we go. And I'll hit OK. Now, with that layer selected, I am now going to create a 3D object using this as the main texture. So to do this, we go to 3D, New Mesh from Layer, Mesh Presets, and you can see a whole bunch of different shapes that you can try out, and it will map the selected layer to that shape. So for this, we're just going to use a simple sphere. And we'll let Photoshop think for a moment, and there we go. Photoshop took the layer and mapped it around the actual sphere. Now, when we're in 3D mode, in order to move around and operate, we are always just on the standard Move tool. So right now I have my object selected, as we can see with this bounding box. So if I was to click and drag, I would be moving my object, and we can take a nice look around this sphere. If I just click off of the object, I deselected it. I'm no longer selecting the object, so I won't be moving the object. Instead, if you look over at the 3D panel on the right here, you'll see that we have the current view selected. This is actually our camera view. If I was to click and drag now, I'm not moving the object, I'm moving the camera around the object. Now, this also has one other way of moving, so always watch out for what you're moving and what we're animating more specifically later on. So we can move the camera as well as the sphere, which was the object that we moved at first. Okay? Now you can also select the scene and move the whole scene. Now what is happening is the object will be moving. If we had multiple objects, all of those objects would technically start moving. Now, it seems fine, but later on when we start animating, note that the scene is not animatable. Only the camera or the objects are animatable. Now, you'll also note this little thing in the center here. I refer to this as the global SRT, or the Scale, Transform, and Rotate tool. So each piece of this tool, the top, is able to move the object straight up and down, or if I hover over the red, which is my x-axis, left or right. The second portion is the rotation, so each one can rotate on a different axis. So I can click and drag that to rotate my planet around. And the third one is the scale. So if I just use one of these axes, I would scale it in just that axis. I'm just going to Control Z that. If you want to scale uniformly, as in a straight equal scale, there's the little box in the center for increasing or decreasing the size. And there we go. Now for my planet here, I just want to make one little change. So with my sphere selected, I get the properties of the mesh. Now one of the properties that I want to turn off actually is the shadow underneath. So I'm just going to turn off cast shadow. I want to keep on cat shadow because I want it to have at least maybe even other shadows, but we won't see this unless we have other objects. Now I do want to adjust the material a little bit. I actually want to create a bumpy effect on this. So over in the sphere's properties here, I'm just going to select the sphere material. Now you'll see in the properties panel we get all the properties for the material, including where we actually plugged in what's known as the diffuse color, and we put in our own texture. That was when we created the layer. Now we can play around with all kinds of other little settings, but one that I want to try out in particular is this one, bump, to give it an actual bump map. Over on the right we have this little folder here. Now when you see the folder, that means there's nothing actually plugged in terms of a texture. I'm going to create a new texture. So I'm going to click the little folder and I'm going to go new texture. And it gives me some options, or the options to create a new document. I like to keep my documents generally square, so I'm going to have this be 1024 by 1024. Just a little thing left over from doing lots of 3D work in other programs. We always keep our document square. So I'll hit OK. And now you'll notice that in the corner here, the little icon has changed to show that there's a texture plugged in, but we haven't actually done anything with it. So I'm going to click on that again, and now I get a few more options. I can now edit the texture that's plugged in. So I'm going to edit that texture. And here we go. Now, don't be worried about this mesh here. This is just a 3D representation of the actual, what's called UV texture map. We won't get too far in it today, but if you want to just hide that, over on the right here, you can uncheck UV overlays to turn that off. Now, I just want to do something really simple. I just want to do actually the same thing I did with the clouds, but I want to make sure that it's black and white. A bump map reacts only to black and white information. Black will recede, white will raise. Now, if you do have colors, it's not going to matter. All it'll do is just turn them black and white anyway. But I'm just going to set my colors to black and white by clicking the little reset button here. Then I'll go filter, and I'll just quickly go the same clouds again. And there we go. Now, I'm just going to save this, because as you can see, it opened me up in a new document here. So I'll just save that document. And then I'll go back to my previous document. And hard to notice now, but it does have a little bump, but what I can do now is raise the actual bump effect, and you'll see how it's using the cloud texture that we just created to create a bump map, making it look a little more rocky. Perfect. Now, last little thing I want to do is I just want to adjust the light of this planet. Now you'll notice somewhere in your scene there's a little circle here for our infinite light. So this is the direction and where the infinite light's coming from. So if I click that, that will select the infinite light and show it in my stage. This is also in the layers panel at the bottom. So now that I have the infinite light selected, just as I would with the object or the camera, I can tilt the light to change the actual lighting of the scene. So I'm going to have it just come sort of on one side here. And there we go. There, I like that a little bit better. Now, if you select your light, you will see your different light options at the top here. So you can play around and adjust those lighting options if you so choose, such as the intensity of the light, or even the color of the light. Now, we won't get into soft shadows. This creates a very long render process, which we won't get into at this point. Cool, so I think I'm about done. Let me just see. I do want to just adjust my ambient here. I want the shadows to be a little darker, so I'm just going to make sure it is set to a full black. I want to play around with the shine just so it has a little bit of speckle on it, so I do suggest just playing around with these settings. Reflection, we will not see. This is something that happens in post, which we won't really get to. Roughness is how rough that shine on it, the specular, is, though our bump kind of took care of most of that. Opacity, pretty self-explanatory, how opaque the object is. And refraction is the refraction of light, which another post-process thing which we won't get into. So it is bending light through an opaque object, similar to how light bends through water. Alright, and yes, I think I like where that is. Maybe I'll just add a specular of a solid white. No, that's way too bright. So let's keep that at a black, actually. There, that darkened my shadows really nicely there. Perfect. So now, all these little features are animatable in our timeline. So what I want to do is I want to just have my light animate a little bit around the planet. So, down at the bottom, I'm going to open up my timeline panel. And I'll just raise this up a little bit. Now in the timeline panel, we have the option to create two different types of timeline. The old frame animation timeline, which is kind of rudimentary and I will never want to touch again, because now Photoshop has introduced the video timeline. So all I have to do is just click this Create Video Timeline button, and now I get a video timeline. So right here, it starts me off at a 10-second clip. I can choose to change that, so if I don't want it to be that long, I can take the edge of this clip and I can reduce its length. So maybe I only want it at about 5 seconds. So I hit the space bar, we can see it playing. Now right now it's kind of trying to render, so it's not playing at full frames per second, as you can see at the bottom here. So it's only playing at 5 frames per second due to just how much I'm running on my computer right now. Okay. But then if you render it, it'll then play at nearly full frames per second. So you can see as it gets to this green bar, it's going slow. But if I start it again, everything that's in green is already rendered. So it plays it at near real time. So before I spend the time rendering, I'd rather get my animation going. So to see what I can animate, I can open up this little panel on the left here for the layer. And I can see all the different options. So I can render position, opacity, layer styles, 3D scene position, camera position, and render settings, and even cross-section settings. Down below, it also shows me where I can render the lights, my 3D materials, and the 3D meshes itself. So the 3D mesh being the actual shape. So I'm actually going to render my 3D mesh. So I'm just going to go to the beginning, and to start a animation, I want to set a keyframe for its current position, and then I'm just going to have this slowly rotate in one direction. So I just hit the little stopwatch here, and that sets a key for the 3D mesh. Now I'll just move forward in time. I'll select my sphere, and just make sure that it is the sphere that you have selected and not the scene, because they are two different things. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate my planet in one direction this way. And there we go. You can see it automatically made a key at the end here, showing that I've made a change in the object's position. So if I scrub my timeline, we can see the animation. Perfect. Now another thing that I can animate in the scene that I would like is the light. So I'm going to go to the beginning, and actually I want to change my beginning light. So I'm just going to select my light, and I'm actually going to rotate it a little bit more this way so it's really dark. And then I'm going to key it there. Now I'll go to my ending position, and I'm going to take the light and I'm going to start bringing it back so that it's facing me. And there we go, the automatic key gets added in, showing that we made a change to our light after we initially keyed it. And now the light animates, so we get a little bit of a sunrise happening on the one side. And there we go. So note the scene position and camera position here are actually animatable as well, but we're going to keep our camera stationary. Go. Now that I have all that, I want to bring this into a new scene. So I'm going to actually just do one little thing in my layers. I'm going to hide the background here, just because when I bring in the new scene, I want the background to be transparent. So I'm going to save this out, and I'm just going to save it to my desktop for now as Planet, and I'll hit save. Now I'm going to actually start a new project. So I'll go File, New. And this one I'm going to just make for, I'll make it for film and give it a nice HD 720 setting, so it's ready for even a quick YouTube video. Then what I'm going to do is bring in my planet. So I'll just go File and Place. Then on my desktop I'll grab my planet PSD and I'll place it in the scene. There we go. So this allows me to maneuver it around and place it wherever I like. So I'll put it in this upper right hand corner here. Now I'm going to create a video timeline on this scene as well. As you can see, it goes to 5 seconds, what was my last settings, and the smart object, so since I placed a whole PSD, it shows up as a smart object, still retains all of its animation. And then I can, in turn, animate this smart object, so sort of an embedded animation trick. So what I want to do on this one is I actually want to give this a little bit of layer styles as well. I also want my background to be black, so I'm just going to invert the background with Control-I. And as we can see, the planet doesn't come with its white background since we hid it in the original PSD. Let's see, I don't like how light the one side is, so I am going to just throw on a levels and clip it to the planet. And I'm just going to pull the darks to be a little darker on the one side there. There we go, and let's just scrub that, see how it looks. I like that, a little bit more of a harsh setting there. Then I want to give it a little bit of a slight glow to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the planet here and I'm going to give it a layer style. So I can just double click on the edge of the layer, and just to give it a glow on the one side, I'm going to actually add a drop shadow. I'm going to set it to screen and change my color to something closer to the planet's same yellow effect. It's a little bit lighter than that. There we go. Then I'm just going to change the angle to point at the other side of the planet, like so. And there we go. Now I only see this sort of atmosphere on the one side that's lit on the planet. Now note that all of these settings are also animatable. So I'm actually just going to keep my atmosphere there for now. Let me just scrub to the beginning. I'm just going to go back and adjust that drop shadow. So I want its distance to be still about there, but its size I'm going to shrink about to there and lower its opacity. There we go. Hit OK. Now if I open up the planet's smart object, you'll notice it's not giving me 3D settings, it's giving me settings that work for a smart object. One of which I want to style is, well, the style. I mean, key is the style, yes. I'll keyframe that. Now I'll scrub to the end when my planet is fully lit. Go back to the drop shadow. And I'm going to increase that distance again, increase that size, as well as that opacity again. Okay. I'll hit OK. And now that auto-keyed the styles so that I get this nice little shift in the atmosphere. And there we go. Oh. So all that's left is I just want to put some stars in the background here. So here's a little trick I like. I'm just going to make a new layer above my background layer. So I'll just go New Layer. And I'll just name it Stars. Okay. Then I'm going to go to my brush tool, set my color to white, lower my opacity quite a bit, as well as my flow may as well. Really low, so it's like in the 20s. I'm then just going to make my brush much bigger, but not too big, as well as fully soft, so a soft-edged, larger brush. And then I'm just going to go over it, so may not be able to see this as well because it's very soft, but I can also go over it multiple times. But what I'm doing here is I'm going to take that layer and I'm going to go over and set the blending mode to dissolve. And as you can see, this creates this dissolving effect, which almost looks like thousands of little stars. Now that's quite a few. I don't want that many stars. So the nice thing about dissolve is it's just controlled by how opaque the layer is. So I'm just going to pull down the entire layer opacity, and you can start to see how the stars just start to disappear. So just find your happy medium for how many stars you want in your scene. And if you want to fill in some more areas, just take that really soft paintbrush and just fill it in a little bit more. And there we go. Go. So as we pull, oh, one little thing that I forgot to mention is when you make a new layer, I had my timeline scrubbed to the end, so my layer started at the 5-second mark for the stars. I just need to click and drag and bring that to make sure it's at the same time as the rest of my planet. Oh. Perfect. So I guess the only other thing I may want to do is just add a little sun flare to this. So I'm just going to minimize that. Quick thing I can do for this is I'm going to make a new layer above everything. Oh, same thing. I left my timeline in the center so the layer started there. Just make sure it's at the same point as the rest of the scene. I'll start at the beginning too. I'm going to fill this layer with black. Now if black is your background color, then you can use Command Backspace or Control Backspace on Windows to fill it with black. I'm then going to set the blending mode to screen. So this, in essence, hides all blacks. So now that I have this black layer that doesn't show any black, it'll only show light. I'm going to go to Filter and Render Lens Flare. And then with the lens flare, I'm just going to try and guesstimate where my planet is. I can come back and try this a couple times. Actually, one thing that I should do is make the layer a smart object. So, sorry, I'm just going to cancel that and turn this black layer into a smart object. So I'll just go right click and convert to smart object. This just makes it so that I can easily edit the effects that I add. So I'll just go lens flare again. Move it to where I think it should be. Close, but if it's not correct, I can go back into the lens flare by just double clicking it on the layer and just move it a bit. So you can only do that with a smart object. Okay, and a little bit more. No, too much. And there we go. Cool. So I like that, just sort of beaming off the one side there. Cool. So what I can do is I can just slightly start shifting this lens flare over a bit. Now at this time the smart filters are not animatable in Photoshop, but Adobe does see that that will be a possibility in the near future. So for now I'm just going to animate its position and its opacity. So I'm actually going to lower the opacity of the layer a bit. Right about there. And I'm going to key the opacity as well as the transform since I'm going to move it in a bit. Then I'm going to scrub to the end here. And then on the layer, oh, just a little bit forward, I'm going to raise my opacity all the way back up and move this lens flare a little bit up to about here. And there we go, it's already keyed. Now let me just move my stars, they were one frame off. And there we go. We get a nice movement, slow movement of our lens flare, as well as a little bit of an opacity shift. Now I actually want the opacity to be a little bit brighter more immediately, so maybe as soon as the light starts to peek out here, yeah, right about here, I'm going to set my own key. And if I want to just set a key without touching any of the settings, I can just go over here and click on the key, and it'll add a key. Now I'm just going to move a little bit forward, and I'm actually going to have this just blast out right away. So this way, the sun is just really barely peeking, and then all of a sudden it just flashes in front. Perfect. Cool. So that's our quick little planet animation where we used a 3D object and briefly went over some of the 3D tools, as well as going over some of Photoshop's video timelines and keyframing. Till next time.